So this is the last bit of new material for the course, Biology 214. We're going to talk about fetal development, the fetal period, birth, and inheritance. There's a picture there you can see at the time of about the end of the first trimester as the transition from the embryonic period to the fetal period. You can see the head is mostly done. The limb buds are there, and now we're going to go through a lot of growth, further development, and then birth and lactation. Remember, in the embryonic period, you had the formation of the germ layers, the formation of the extra embryonic membranes that form the placenta, and then the formation of most organs. Um, those those all form during the embryonic period. That includes the heart, the brain and the nervous system, the arms, the parts of the head, including the eyes and ears, teeth, palate, things like that. Those are all forming approximately in the first 8 weeks. That's the first trimester, the end of the embryonic period, and then you're in the fetal period where there's a lot of growth and development. The organs, of course, aren't yet functioning, but they're present and starting to grow. This same time is when sexual differentiation occurs. The gonad, the original developing gonad, can form either testes or ovary. It depends upon the position of, or upon the hormonal environment. And what will happen depends upon the presence of what hormones. If the testosterone is present, you'll get the development of the male anatomy. If it's not present, then you'll get the development of the female anatomy. Okay. One of the key things in the fetal period is that the placenta takes over producing hormones and it's providing food, and there's lots of growth. This is the major period of growth. And of course, all that the nutrients for that growth are provided by the placenta, come through the umbilical vein, and then enter the fetus. Okay. Since the organs aren't functioning that time, there is a bypass through the liver. That's the ductus venosus, and then there's bypasses around the lungs which aren't functioning. These include the foramen ovale, so nutrient-rich blood with has oxygen in it can bypass the lungs and go directly from the right atrium to the left atrium. And then any that does enter the right ventricle and is pumped out the pulmonary trunk winds up going through the ductus arteriosus into the aorta. And so this is the key thing that's going to supply the nutritional needs of the developing fetus. During pregnancy, a fetus at fully term fetus is probably going to weigh around 8 pounds. Most of the maternal changes, that most of the weight gain is going to be growth in adipose tissue, in breast tissue, in uterine tissues, increases in blood volume. And of course, there are other changes in GI motility, increases in respiration, changes in digestive function because the digestive tract is being kind of squeezed by the expanding uterus. Okay. Uterine and adipose and blood vessels and things like that will cause most of the weight gain, which in a normal pregnancy should be between 22 to 28 pounds at 40 weeks. Okay, the uterus is going to fill most of the abdominal cavity by the end of that. Um, for women who are obese or overweight or obese to start pregnancy, or who gain more than is expected during pregnancy, there are risks. Women should gain weight during pregnancy, or at least not lose weight, but they're at higher risk for high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, that's runaway blood pressure, prolonged labor, unplanned cesarean, and breastfeeding difficulties. Um, what initiates labor is the growing fetus in the uterus. That is going to activate stretch receptors, and those things will start causing changes that will lead to birth. This will include the dilation of the cervix. It will start including increases in contractions of the myometrium, the muscles of the uterus. Those muscles will help expel the baby, so through the birth canal. And at the same time, after that happens, they will also expel the remains of the placenta, the afterbirth. Um, the placenta is a relatively large structure here shown there. It's taken over during pregnancy. It's taken over progesterone and estrogen production for the ovary, and so it's a really important structure. At the time birth occurs, there have to be a bunch of changes that allow the infant's organs to take over from the placenta. These include activating the respiratory system, so those first couple breaths, and then adjustments of the circulatory system so that the ductus venosus closes in the liver, okay, and becomes a ligament. The foramen ovale will close and become just the fossa ovale, a little depression in the walls between the atrium, and then the ductus arteriosus closes and becomes a ligament. Um, and so these are really crucial. And much of the greatest dangers to the newborn are if these respiratory and circulatory changes don't happen. Of course, the gastrointestinal tract has to become active. The baby has to start thermoregulating. The urinary system is now going to become active and start taking care of cleaning the blood and making sure that everything's okay. Of course, the food for the baby is going to be supplied by the mother through breast milk. Um, Breast milk provides the optimal nutrition, the right balance of sugars, lipids, and proteins. It also is uh, transferring the mother's immunity. The mother's antibodies are transferred through breast milk. This is IgA. It has a secretory piece that helps the infant absorb it and then use this. We know infants that are breastfed have reduced incidence of infections, respiratory, gastrointestinal infections, ear infections. In fact, anything the mother is producing antibodies against, the baby will be immune to. Also, breastfeeding is helpful in bonding, so that the baby bonds to the mother and the mother bonds to the baby. It's much more convenient than the preparation of formula. It's not as long as the mother breastfeeds, she's not going to run out of breast milk. It's not going to cost as much, and so she doesn't have to run to the store, and you don't have that. Um, for the mother, the production of breast milk helps the recovery from the birth process. The uterus recovers its normal size. The mother will lose that. It's easier for the mother to lose weight if she's breastfeeding. It's easier for the mother to bond with the infant. Psychosocial benefits to breastfeeding. There are some times when there are contraindications to breastfeeding. If a woman has an infection in the breast, mastitis, if she's struggling with addiction or something like that, then those are contraindications or on some medications. But in most cases, breastfeeding should be strongly preferred. Okay, I have to say a little bit about genetics here. This is the one place you're supposed to get genetics. Humans have 46 chromosomes and 23 pairs. Males have their they don't have a pair of sex chromosomes. They have an X and a Y. Females have a pair of X's. Um, 22 of these chromosomes are autosomes, which means they aren't involved in sex, so they won't be different between men and women. Um, One chromosome out of each of these pair comes from each parent. The chromosomes contain the genes. People contain two genes for each trait. One gene they've inherited from their mother, one from their father. If they inherit identical genes from either parent, they're referred to as homozygous for that trait. Okay, and then that gene will be expressed. If they're heterozygous, having different versions of that gene for a particular trait, in some cases, or in most cases, only one of those genes will be expressed. Like, for instance, if you have a gene for brown eye color and a gene for blue eye color, okay, you are heterozygous, and you will only express the gene for brown eye color. The other gene is referred to as recessive, and it's hidden by the dominant gene, which is in this case brown eye color. There are lots of diseases where that are caused by recessive genes, genes that are hidden if a normal gene is present. But if you have two copies of the recessive gene, you will express the condition. So a good example is cystic fibrosis. In that case, the recessive gene for cystic fibrosis is for a defective chloride transport molecule. If you have one copy of that gene, it doesn't matter because the normal gene will give you enough of the good chloride transporter that you'll be perfectly fine. But if you have two copies of the recessive gene, you'll have what used to be 100% fatal defect called cystic fibrosis. Now it can be treated. Sometimes there are the X chromosome, that's the female sex chromosome, is much larger than the male and contains many more genes. And if you have two copies of, if a woman has two copies of the X chromosome, and so for every gene on there, she may be homozygous or heterozygous, she will have two genes. Males, on the other hand, only have one X chromosome. And that means that if any gene they have on the X chromosome is expressed, because there's no corresponding gene on the Y chromosome. So there's a bunch of recessive conditions that aren't hidden in males because they're carried on the X chromosome. They're always there. So these are sex-linked diseases like muscular dystrophy and so on. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to inheritance. The last bit of new material. Review materials are going to be available this week. And so check the other PowerPoint and recorded program, and that's the start of the new materials. We'll review on Wednesday.